Hello all, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Late Production Tiger 1. Since the last video update, progress has been made to the model suspension, and the swing arms and torsion bar system has now been added and is complete. We'll go over more of what went on to this model in this video. On these Armortek tanks, if you're doing a teardown or if you need to reinstall the sprocket and get access to it, because of the taper lock system, the sprockets are on very strong and don't come off very easily. Now, if you're doing a teardown, you're going to obviously have to take that sprocket off. The best way to do it and the most efficient way to do it is with use of a gear puller. I simply mount the gear puller to the sprocket and then a couple turns on this knob here and the whole system just slides right off. And here's the gear puller fitted to the sprocket. If we notice, over here you would turn it with a wrench or a socket. However, I'm just going to rotate it with my hand, and that should be enough force to loosen the sprocket from the main drive shaft. Like so. After a couple light taps with a rubber mallet, the sprocket pops right off. And to remove the key, I simply just take a screwdriver and just plump it a little bit with the rubber mallet, and that's now removed. To remove the gear puller out of the sprocket, you just knock it out from the back, like so, and now the sprocket has been stripped. And here go the swing arms removed from the tank. Like all Armortek German tanks, the suspensions breaks down as follows. You have a steel torsion bar. You have a torsion bar mount, the swing arm, and your axle. Now, the swing arm itself is made out of aluminum and it's CNC'd, while the torsion bar mount and your axle are made out of steel. All the parts are pre-drilled and pre-tapped so that they have their threads on them. And the way it works is that the axle and the torsion bar mount simply thread into the swing arm, creating one piece. As for mounting the torsion bar itself, each torsion bar axle has two small holes drilled in that are tapped and are designed for two small Allen grub bolts, which give for a nice flat finish like we have here. There's no bolts or anything protruding out from them. On the torsion bar, if we notice, there's a small little flat ground into the steel. From what I've seen on this build from the instructions, that this flat on this version of the Armortek Tiger 1 has the flats pre-ground on. In the past, you were just supplied with a solid steel rod, and the flats were something that you had to do yourself. The flats are highly recommended in that they prevent the swing arm from rotating without grabbing onto the torsion bar. The flats prevent the piece from swinging and lock the torsion bar together as one firm piece. Also, another thing about the Armortek tanks, more specifically their German tanks, is that they have two sets of torsion bars. For the wheels in the center portion of the vehicle, you have a thinner torsion bar here. For the two wheels that are in the front and in the rear of the vehicle, you have a thicker torsion bar like this one over here. It's very important when you're building the model to properly label everything, because if you don't, it is very easily confused between the two pieces in that at a quick glance, they look very similar. However, the thicker torsion bar we have here is a lot stronger and is meant to hold up the tank from the front and the rear. The previous builder did label everything to keep everything nice and organized as we have here. The 5.0 refers to the thinner torsion bar, because I believe it's 5 millimeters, and the 5.5 is for the thicker one, which is, I believe, 5.5 millimeters. One addition that was made to the Armortek tanks on the newer version of the Tiger 1. The suspension is a little bit modified from that of their previous releases and on other tanks such as their Panther and Tiger 2. The way their other tanks, the torsion bar would be fitted, was they had a long steel block, long aluminum block, and the torsion bar would simply lock into this hole in the block, and then a single bolt would then crimp down on the flat, thus securing the torsion bar in place. On this new version of the Tiger, they kind of changed it up a bit in that they have a steel CNC nub that goes on the end of the torsion bar, and then that gets bolted on with two flats, or two grub screws onto the flat that was previously pre-ground on. This unit would then slide into a big rectangle, and then a single set screw would be screwed in from this end here. The purpose of this is that this system makes it easier to adjust the torsion bar setting, and it's more adjustable than their other offering. The other version, you had to align everything up and make sure the flats were in the proper location to ensure the proper height. With this new system, it's adjustable so you can tweak it to any way you deem fit. Just like with the torsion bar swing axles, there are two types of end caps. This version here is for the 5.5, and this version here is for the 5.0. They look identical, however, the holes are slightly larger on the 5.5 for obvious reasons. The way to tell the two apart is that the 5.5 has a small little divot machined into it, and the 5.0 does not. For the purposes of the rebuild, to keep things from getting mixed and confused, I have two separate bags for all of the parts, and I labeled them as such. This is a good tip if anyone is doing a rebuild to do the same thing, because again, the parts all look the same from quick glance, and it's easily preventable from getting anything mixed if you properly label everything. Back to the swing arms themselves. Like I mentioned earlier, the swing arms are comprised of basically three pieces: the axle, the swing arm, and the torsion bar mount. Now, these thread onto the swing arm that we have here and are kept in place. However, it is very common for these pieces to unthread and unscrew on you while the model is in motion, which is not ideal. The best way to solve this is to pin the pieces in place. Now, the previous builder did go ahead and use an epoxy to glue everything together, which was a good idea. However, as good as the epoxy is, I just feel that it's better to pin things to have a mechanical break inside to keep everything nice and in place, in that epoxies and glues have a tendency to crack over time, while the pin will be more of a permanent solution. The swing arms have now been pinned, and the unit is now one piece. As for exactly how to pin these swing arms together, I made a tutorial video, and that video can be found on my video listing, and the link is listed below in the description. That video goes into detail about exactly how to pin them and the tools and procedures required to accomplish the task. Also, if we notice, all the swing arms themselves have all look brand new. Originally, the swing arms had some surface rust on their steel axles. The steel is made out of a mild steel type, and if left exposed to the air, will begin to have some rust on them. Fortunately, the rust was only superficial and was just some light powdery rust that was on the surface of the steel. To go ahead and clean the parts, I went ahead and just hit it with some light sandpaper, which was able to remove the rust, the small little superficial rusty layer, leaving for a nice polished appearance. After this procedure, I will now go ahead and reinsert the torsion bars, and then once the torsion bars are reinstalled, I can then go ahead and prime the components with their primer. Once the metal parts have their primer installed onto it, they become more resilient to corrosion. And here go the swing arms, now ready for paint. Now, as of note, just before the swing arms go into painting, each one of the swing arms was fitted to the model, thus ensuring that the torsion bar was at the right length. Sometimes you need to adjust the torsion bar length a little by grinding off a little piece of the torsion bar itself, so that the swing arm, when it protrudes out of the hull, it's nice and flush and doesn't have any gaps or spacing. If there is gaps or spacing, that could cause wheel alignment issues down the road. In addition to getting the torsion bars the right length, the modification was also made to the torsion bar securing cap here. As I mentioned, on this version of the Tiger 1, Armortek has a single bolt that enters from the side of the hull that secures the torsion bar to the model. Problem was, I felt that the torsion bar restraining design that Armortek came up with still will allow the torsion bar to get loose and at time cause the suspension to sag. The best way to fix it was using a system that Armortek actually incorporated on their earlier vehicles, which was having a bolt directly on top of the torsion bar, thus grabbing it and keeping it from spinning. I modified the Armortek system by adding the flat to their torsion bar retention cap here, and I also drilled and tapped the restraining bar, which is currently mounted inside the model. Once the swing arms are painted, I'll go over on how the installation now proceeds. As for the flat itself, the flat was ground down at approximately 35 degrees, which is the proper height for these German vehicles. To get the flat synchronized with all the torsion bars so that they're all uniform, I came up with a quick little jig. This jig here, simply you align the torsion bar inside of the jig when it's in the vise, and now you can mark and grind down the portion here of the spot of the torsion bar that you want to add the flat. The jig itself was made out of just some scrap wood that I had lying around the shop, and as for acquiring the proper angles, that was aided with the help of a protractor. Just before the torsion bars go into painting, I go ahead and I mask up the important areas. The areas that I mask up is this little section here on the swing arm axle, and this portion here on the road wheel axle. The purpose of this is that I don't want any paint on this location, because this is the location where the swing arm slips into the hull and actually pivots. You want to have this very smooth as well as lubricated, and so to do that you don't want paint on it, which is why it's masked now. Similar for the road wheel axle. In addition to not getting any paint on, the road wheels are going to be installed a little bit later, and the tape protects the axle from any damage as well as from getting any surface rust until the lubrication and the road wheels are reinstalled. Another thing that was done was, if we notice, the little identification numbers were sanded off of the swing arm. If we recall, the previous builder identified each of the swing arms with a Sharpie. This is because, again, the Armortek tank uses two types of torsion bars. There's a 5mm and a 5.5mm. The 5.5s are thicker and used for the front and the back, and it is very easy to mix the two up at quick glance if not labeled properly. Since the lettering was removed because the Sharpie could pop through the primer, lettering was removed, and so to identify which pieces are the 5.5mm ones, I went ahead and with a center punch I made a small indentation on the swing arm. This indentation is only found on the 5.5mm swing arms, thus separating them from the pack, which will help prevent any confusion when installation is beginning. And here's the model with half its suspension added. It is at this time we could have the opportunity to see exactly how the suspension goes together. As we can see, the swing arms which are on this side are mounted. This here, running along the lower hull, is the main mounting block, which I'm always referring to. The part that the axles enter, if we notice, has a small brass machined bushing. The bushing itself is all made out of CNC brass and is a very nicely machined piece, and there are enough of them to equip the entire tank, all 16 swing arms. As for installation of the brass bushing, I like to install it after the hull has its base coat of primer added. As for the installation, it's really simple. I just take some thread lock or some Loctite, put a small little rim around, insert it into the hole where it belongs, and then with the aid of a rubber mallet, I go ahead and nudge it into position to where it's supposed to be installed. Once it's installed, it's a maintenance-free piece, and you don't have to worry about it once it's installed. As for this end here, this is where the swing arms, or where the torsion bars get secured to the model. Like I've shown before, here goes the torsion bar swing arm assembly, now all primed. This end plunger here is what inserts into the small little cavity. Once it is inserted in, a bolt is then inserted from the other reverse side of the model, which threads into this section here. The purpose of that bolt is, like I mentioned earlier, not only is it to fasten the lower hull mounting plate to the sidewall, but it also secures the torsion bar to the swing arm in one unit. To help prevent the part from twisting, each swing arm location is equipped with a star washer. This here is as per the kit. The kit includes all the star washers that you see here. The one advantage that this kit system has is that adjusting the angle of the swing arms is a lot easier than it was before. Before, you would have to precisely measure where the swing arm needed to go and then grind down a small ledge on the torsion bar itself. With this new system, you simply bolt it to the side of the hull and you just you crank down on the bolt once the swing arm is set to your personal preference. The system appears to work okay. However, I felt that the system was a little bit weak in that it could have room for the part to still get loose on you. As you can see, where you're mounting it to the tank, it could still have freedom of movement. The system that I liked was the system that was originally used on the Armortek tanks, in which you have a lock bolt which goes on the top portion of the swing arm, which is why I ground down that little flat here. All these holes were drilled and tapped, and once installed, not only do you have the securing bolt here, but you also have the lock bolt on top, which will really keep the swing arm in its place, and you'll have maintenance-free worry of the swing arms ever getting loose on you. To get an idea on what the unit looks like once assembled, here is the reverse side of the swing arms that I just shown. As we can see, the bolts are tightly crimped down on top of the little flat that was ground into the metal plunger, which aids in keeping the swing arm in its proper place. Also, if we could notice, the one adjustment screw all the way in the front is a lot shorter than the other versions. This is because of the motor mount and motor fixture, which will be mounted along the side hull over there as the build progresses. I went with the shorter bolt because in the past, the taller bolts would interfere with the motor mounting system. By using the shorter bolt, this should clear the motor bracket once it's installed. Here is the side of the Tiger 1 that has its suspension already fitted to the reverse side. These bolts that you see here are the securing bolts for the swing arms and for securing the bracket to the hull. In addition to the brass bushing, the kit also has small seals that go into each of the swing arm outlets. If we notice, there's a small little ridge that is machined into the recess of the mounting block right in here. It's a little bit hard to get in frame, but there is a small little recess in there. The purpose of that recess is to affix the little rubber O-rings that come with the kit. The purpose of the O-rings is that it seals off the lower portion of the hull to any dirt and debris and moisture that could possibly enter while the tank is in motion. To insert the O-ring, you simply just slip it into the little recess that is milled into the mounting block. It's a simple procedure and just snaps right in as such. These O-rings, as of note, are a recent addition to the Armortek kits. They were first brought onto the scene in, I believe, the Panther, and then every other subsequent German tank release. Their earlier German tank releases did not have the rubber O-ring present, which is one way to tell the different kits apart. And here goes all of the O-rings installed. As I mentioned before, the O-rings are a simple installation, and once installed are a maintenance-free piece in that you just install them once and you don't have to worry about servicing or accessing them once the tank is assembled. Earlier I explained that before I go ahead and prime the swing arms, I go ahead and mask up the two axles. Well, here's the axle without the tape on it. As you can see, it's still left and it's bare steel. Prior to installation, each of the swing arms will have grease applied to the non-paint applied area of each axle. The grease will not only help protect the metal from corrosion, it will also help keep it nice and lubricated, which will help it swing a lot more easily, and it will also help with the installation as it will slide directly into the bushing with a lot less friction. And here go the swing arms mounted to this portion of the vehicle. If we notice on the driver's side of the model, the swing arms face to the front of the vehicle, while on the reverse side, they face to the rear. This is a common feature on all German tanks equipped with torsion bar suspensions, namely the Tiger I, the Panther, and the King Tiger. And here we can see on the opposite side what I was referring to with the swing arms pointing towards the rear of the vehicle as opposed to point to the front like they are on the right-hand side. Once the swing arm is installed, you could test it by simply holding onto the top of the model so it doesn't wobble off the table. You grab the swing arm and you simply pull up and notice that it will bounce back to the home state. To get an idea on how the swing arm looks like in the interior when it's moving, I am lifting the swing arm up and letting it go and having it return to its home state under its own power. As you can see, here's the swing arm mounting point here on the torsion arm or torsion bar. And there's the torsion bar end cap like we mentioned earlier. Also, like mentioned earlier, there's the cross bolt and there's the other mounting bolt that is not visible in this shot. As you can see, I'm moving the torsion bar up and down. However, nothing is moving, which will leave for a nice, very strong suspension that will not sag as the model moves and operates. And here goes the model's interior with the torsion bars completed. As we can see, they both run from left to right and right to left and mount to the vehicle in a very realistic way, as the real Tiger one had a very similar feature. Also, one thing that I did not notice or did not mention in the earlier video when I was discussing the swing arms was that prior to the installation of the swing arms, I went ahead and added a base coat of primer gray to the inside of the model. This was done before the addition of the swing arms and all the swing arm fasteners that you see here. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek Late Production Tiger I. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as other 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.